All right, so now that we've covered the math, we're going to move on and talk about some other ecology vocabulary. So there's sort of a rule called the competitive exclusion principle, and what it says is that two species cannot occupy the same niche. So what is a niche? So if you look at this picture on the left, these two organisms occupy the same niche in the sense that they eat the exact same food. Or you might consider these birds in picture 2. They live in the exact same area and they're competing for the same resources. They hunt at the same time of day. So an organism's way of life is its niche. And the idea is that if two species try to occupy the same one of them is going to eliminate the other. In other words, one of them is going to end up extinct in that area. So the only way that you might see two organisms that might live in the same area might be like picture number 3 over here, which is called resource partitioning. And the idea is that the yellow birds are living here, the red birds come in, and the way that they end up surviving is that the red birds sort of outcompete the yellow ones in this area of the tree, and the yellow ones are eating here and here. So they're not occupying the same niche anymore. So just be aware of what that word niche is, and make sure you know that two species, there's a rule about that, two species cannot occupy the same niche. If you do see them both surviving, they don't occupy the same niche. There must be some niche differences. All right, trophic levels. We've talked about this before. These are like the energy levels in a food chain. So our producers are the ones at the bottom. Usually these are the ones absorbing the energy directly from the sun. So we're talking about plants or marine algae, plankton, things like that. At the bottom of the ocean, there are some rare ecosystems where this might be chemosynthesis of some kind of microorganisms that live inside of tube worms or clam worms or something like that. They are typically going to be, like I said, photosynthetic. But again, chemosynthesis is possible in rare ecosystems. They'd have to tell you that. The primary consumers are the ones that are eating the producers. Usually think of these as your autotrophs, your herbivores that are eating the autotrophs. Secondary consumers eat the primary consumers. And then there's tertiary. Usually you don't see it go above quaternary. Now the decomposers, they're not usually shown in the web, but they're the ones that are going to recycle the matter. Remember, matter gets recycled, so the carbon, the nitrogen, all of those things are getting recycled in the environment, the matter, and the decomposers are responsible for that. So this is like bacteria and fungi that are breaking everything down, but they're not drawn in a food trophic diagram. Usually it's a pyramid. You might see something like this and the decomposers listed out here. Keep in mind too that it's sometimes more complicated. You might have organisms that function at multiple levels. For example, the omnivores are organisms that eat producers and consumers. So they might eat grass and they also eat worms. So now they're sort of functioning at 2 levels in this ecosystem. So this is an example. So you got your primary producers at the bottom. These are your photosynthetic organisms capturing energy directly from the sun, or at the bottom of the ocean from chemicals. You've got your primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary, and like I said, I don't usually see them go above quaternary. These are your top consumers. So productivity is a measure of how much energy is actually being captured and incorporated into these trophic levels. So gross primary productivity is the total amount of photosynthesis, all the energy that's being captured and stored in the bonds of glucose. Sort of like your gross paycheck is your full paycheck. But that's not what you end up taking home. If you have a job, you know that what you actually take home is your net paycheck after they take out taxes and things. So net productivity is the rate at which the producers are actually storing energy. In other words, in simple words, how much energy is actually available to pass on to the next level after you take away what's lost as heat, what they're using for growth and reproduction and all the things they're doing. So each step in a pyramid is typically, it's always a loss of energy, and typically 10% is what gets passed on. The rest of it, it's not destroyed, remember, because energy is not created or destroyed, but it's lost ultimately as heat, but it's turned into a form of energy that's not used. So that's called the 10% rule. We've talked about it before, and that's the net primary productivity. Remember that energy flows, energy can't get recycled, it's eventually converted to heat, but matter does get recycled. The decomposers, when things pass away, are turning, the carbon, the nitrogen, those sorts of things. And then there's oxygen cycles, all of that kind of stuff. This is a sample pyramid just showing 10%. See how you just divide by 10 at each level. It's very simple. So here's some practice questions. If a producer has a primary productivity of 10,000 kilojoules, how much will the primary consumer have available? So if we're assuming the 10% rule, it's going to look like this. So we're saying that this one is at 10,000. This is our producers. Our primary consumer, we're going to just simply divide by 10, is going to be 1,000. How much will the tertiary consumer? So remember, this is our primary. That means our secondary would be 100, which means our tertiary would only be 10. So this would be 10 kilojoules. And this is why, by the way, this is shaped like a triangle and usually doesn't go above quaternary, is because there's just not enough energy to sustain. It takes a lot of grass to feed one mouse, a lot of mice to feed one snake, a lot of snakes to feed one hawk, etc. Okay, if the productivity of prairie grass producers is 200 kilojoules per acre, and the community consists of 150 acres, what's the total productivity? So they like to give math questions like this. They're not difficult. You just have to think it through. 200 kilojoules, that's for 1 acre, sort of like if I make $200 per 1 hour, but I work 150 hours. How much money will I make? So if it's 150 total acres for this community, notice that acres will cancel, and I'll be left with my total amount of kilojoules, which in this case would be 30,000. And finally, in a particular community, the producers have 10,000 kilojoules of energy, but the primary consumers only have 870. What is the percent being passed on? Remember, the 10% rule is kind of a rule of thumb. So if we do 870 over 10,000 times 100 to make it a percent, and you will see that the amount of actually getting passed on in this community is only 8.7%. So these are some math type questions you could be asked. This is just a picture of a food web. Notice that the producers are always shown at the bottom, and then this is sort of the flow of energy getting passed on. Notice this little key thing here. A keystone species is any plant or animal that is so crucial that if it disappears, the ecosystem might collapse. So a lot of times they'll mention an ecosystem, and they'll talk about an organism, say, being affected, and they'll talk about how it terribly affects the ecosystem. Or maybe they'll just tell you it's a keystone species and ask you what the effect will be. So like if the weasel was a keystone species and they say the weasel died, what would happen? Well, now there'd be, maybe less predators to eat the pocket gopher, or the crows wouldn't have enough food, or it's some kind of an organism that plays such a huge role that it would throw everything off. So be aware of that, what that means. If they tell you something's a keystone species, it's going to be a huge effect if that species disappears. Okay, bioaccumulation. So keep in mind, this one confuses people a little bit. When a toxin gets into the water or the soil or the grass or something like that, people assume that the toxin's going to poison the grass, or the lowest levels. And that's actually not what happens. When we're talking about things like heavy metals, or like DDT, which is a chemical that was used in the 70s, you'll notice that what happens is it's in such small concentrations that it doesn't really hurt the grass or the algae or the tiny fish, but it gets stored in their tissues. So since this, the plankton filter a lot of water, and the small fish eat a lot of plankton, and the large fish eat a lot of small fish, what happens is these toxins become more and more concentrated. So by the time you get to the top consumer, the level of heavy metals or things like that in their body is super, super high. And they're the ones that end up getting poisoned. So not the ones at the bottom, but the ones at the top. The eagles in DDT is kind of a famous example. I believe it was in the 70s. They were spraying DDT, and it was I think it was a pesticide, but the levels would build up. Every organism that ate eat the other organisms, and the eagles ended up with such high levels that when they lay their eggs, the shells just collapse, and that's what that picture is on the right. It's actually banned now. And you may see signs like in the Everglades where they'll tell you to limit how much fish you eat or not to eat the fish at all because of the amount of lead in the fish, or the amount of methylmercury is another one. So again, it's the top consumer that ends up with these magnified or high concentrations because they're eating the organisms below. This picture kind of shows the red dot is the level of toxins, and see how each organism that eats another organism, the toxins are now building up and becoming more concentrated. Okay, some questions about a food web. So name a primary consumer. So the primary consumers are the ones eating our producers. So seaweed is a producer, plankton is a producer. So an example of a primary consumer would be the shrimp. Not just the shrimp, also the chitin over here, also the mussel. If the seaweed had a metal poison, which organisms would be the most affected? So that's bioaccumulation. it would be the ones closest to the top. So, for example, perhaps the starfish and the seagull, because chitons eat the seaweed, the crab eats that, now the seagulls eat them, and the seagulls eat the mussels, so it's going to become more concentrated as you go up the chain. Starfish, same. They're eating the rock cod, which ate the chitin, which ate the seaweed. So it's the ones at the top that would be the most affected by that. If all of the chitins died, who would be the most affected? The first one to be affected would probably be the crab, because then it would have no food. So now the crabs would get wiped out. Now the seagulls might have less food to eat, or they would eat more of the mussels, which then might throw off, the plankton. So this could affect the whole ecosystem. But the crab would be the first one I would say would be affected. Not as much also I suppose the rock cod, but the shrimp also eats seaweed. So it would be whoever only eats chitin would be the most affected. So rock cod too, I would say, because it looks like they only eat chitins. And which organism will be a competitor of the mussel? That would be somebody who eats the same thing the mussel eats. So the shrimp would be a good example of a competitor because it also eats the plankton just like the mussel. Okay, this one doesn't have names, but keep in mind that the arrows are usually pointing to the direction of the energy. So this is going to be your producer at the bottom, and then C and B eat the producer, D eats B, and our top consumer is going to be G. Notice how all the arrows eventually end up at G. So the producer is going to be A. The two that would both compete for A would be B and C because they're both eating that. The top consumer, I said, would be G because all the arrows eventually go there, so it's our top consumer. And who would be most affected if C disappeared from the habitat? It would be F because C is their only food source. Again, they usually have your producers at the bottom, and a lot of the time they'll have these lined up, by the way. This one doesn't, but a lot of times I'll show you one on the next slide. These are in the same level. So if you look here, see how they do it here, how all the producers are in the same level. All the primary consumers are in the same level. And if you were supposed to add one, you would want to add it to the same level. You said, hey, add another secondary consumer that eats this one, you would put it exactly in line with these. Now this one's a little weird because it doesn't have the arrows going up, which I thought was strange. They normally go up, but you can tell because they labeled what the producer was. So you're still expected to understand the levels here. So this says, based on the information, which predicts the short-term effect of removing secondary consumer X. So they're basically saying that X dies. So if you think about this, if X dies, think about who eats X. Well, it looks like this primary consumer, X is their only food. That tells me this should go down if there's no more food for them. And if this goes down, what's going to happen to these producers? Now they have nobody eating them, so this should go up. And so that's what we would be looking for. So if you look at these pictures, the only one that really makes sense is A. This gets bigger because there's no predator of it anymore, and now it's going to eat more of these, and so these are going to get smaller. All right, and lastly, succession. This is sort of a definition. So primary succession, this is basically when you have nothing ever living there, and like a new volcanic island forms. Moss and lichen are sometimes called pioneer plants. They can grow on rock, and they tend to break that rock down into soil, and then other things can grow. Once those grow, then usually some other plants and animals will start moving in, and eventually the community changes over time. This is just an example. Obviously they don't all end up as hardwood trees, but as the diversity increases, once it becomes kind of its final stable community, that's called a climax community. Secondary succession is sort of the same thing, but after a fire. So it's secondary because it's a place where there was life, but something happened to it, and then the life comes back. So that kind of wraps up all of our very brief study of ecology.